Mark Borlace from the RAA. Thanks for joining us today on Flow for across regional South Australia.
No, great to be here.
Now, Mark, first of all, the elephant in the room, of course, the Ukraine crisis, and it's feeding into fuel prices. What are we going to see, or what are we seeing right now, especially across regional SA?
Well, currently it's been feeding into international crude oil prices, the Ukrainian conflict, at about 10% a month for the last 2 months. So that's driven the world price of crude up, and Australia, because we're a net importer, we have to pay whatever the world's paying. So if you look at a little bit of a potted summary, pre-COVID it was about $70 a barrel. During the middle of COVID, when nobody was flying or travelling, went down to $20 a barrel, and that's when we're getting really cheap prices. And over the last 15 months, as demand's come back up, supply hasn't been able to keep up with it. And a couple of reasons for that is that we used to have 4 refineries before COVID in Australia. Now we've only got 2, so there's an issue there. And then that was going along till oil was about $80 a barrel about 2 months ago, and then when the conflict started, everybody starts to worry about oil reserves because Russia produces 10% of the world's oil. They might not be able to get it from those sources, so they started paying more for it. And now we've seen it go up over $100 a barrel. So that's kind of the trajectory we've been on. So what that means for us is that what we've seen diesel go up 50 cents in the last 12 months compared to what it was last year, the same time last year. Obviously, that flows into everything in the economy, trucks that have got to transport it, etc., even to farmers, even though farmers get a rebate back for their oil excise. It's the government need to worry about this becoming an inflationary issue. Now, what everybody's doing is watching what happens in Russia, because once the oil gets over $80 US a barrel, there's a lot of other oil fields around the world that become profitable at that stage, and they'll come in to fill in that void Russia leaves because they're not able to sell their oil to anybody. And so what the world's doing now is just watching to see 2 things: how the countries have got their own oil reserves are starting to release it into the market to buffer that price, and then secondly, where they get oil from another market. And that's why we've been saying for 7 or 8 years to the federal government, you need an oil security plan for events like this, so that if for some reason it was shut off, we'd only have a couple of weeks' supply.
Yeah, I was speaking with Senator Jim Molan from New South Wales, who's been on about this fuel security issue for some time, and he, when I asked him, about fuel storage in Australia, he said, well, we've got plenty stored under the ground, just that state governments won't allow it to be extracted. Does your oil security policy position extend to maybe getting some more security out of the ground?
Refineries can't just take any oil. Refineries work within certain parameters. Not all crude oil is the same. So what that means is a lot of American oil can't be processed here because the refineries here can't process that oil because of the sulphur and some other issues. So oil security has to be a multifaceted approach. That is, we need domestic supplies. As we start to drift to electric vehicles, that will get rid of some of that problem because at least we're producing our own electricity domestically and we'll be able to use that. But yeah, it is an issue because what happens is part of our treaty arrangements with the other countries is that we need to hold our own supplies so that they don't have to bail us out in the event of a war happening. So that's, we've got an international obligation to do that, and that's been around for decades. So when Australia's struggled to meet it.
Yeah, and I noticed, and we asked Jim Molan about this one, about the American arrangement where the federal government announced they were going to keep some supply in the American storage that we could pull, but it's sort of one bird in the hand to be worth 2 in the bush, wouldn't it really? It's a long way across from America to here if we needed it shortly. Entirely.
It doesn't matter if there's a blockade or there's a problem from getting it. It doesn't really matter whether it's crude oil or refined oil. It's still offshore, as you say, and still has a problem with with just getting it here.
Now, it's an intriguing situation just on the crude oil situation and who's, putting out OPEC and that sort of thing. But on the domestic front, are we seeing retailers, is RAA concerned they might be perhaps taking advantage of the spike and getting a little bit of retail margin off the back of this hike?
Well, there's been a bit of margin creep over the last 12 months. And part of that, the oil industry will say, well, during COVID, when nobody was buying fuel, we still had to pay rent, we still had to pay wages, etc., and we're trying to get back some of that. Oil companies kind of look at things in the form of like 12 months profitability, not weekly profitability. So some of that will be that creep. The regions don't have a price cycle like the city, like Adelaide does. But what we've seen since the fuel apps come in, that is real-time fuel pricing, we've seen a bit more variety in the prices in regional towns now. And what we're doing is encouraging people to always shop on price. And that way, if you change your behaviour, you're likely to change the behaviour of the oil company.
Yeah, the RAA, I think, is one of them. Opportunities you've got to get the app and check out your fuel prices locally. I ducked down on Sunday morning to get $1.66 before it went to $1.82 locally. But is that locked in South Australia? Is that definitely going to keep being available, the Fuel Watch app in regional areas?
Yeah, so what happens is it's part of a 2-year trial. We've asked the government to just jump the trial. We've seen a massive uptake of it. We've seen people saving a lot of money. And what we're saying to government and have said to government, just jump the trial. Why don't go to, keep it in place from now on? My guess is that they'll do that, but it's still technically a trial.
Yeah, it's just interesting. It comes to mind, I've seen a press release from the Marshall government today on Wednesday that they're saying that they're going to double the amount of patient-assisted transport scheme funding from 16 cents a litre to 32. Surely that's also off the back of the spike in the prices.
Yeah, well, it's when you're transporting, your major cost is really that fuel cost. And as we've seen it really double in price from 15 months ago. When it was at its lowest, buying it under $1. So, it's a fluid, excuse the pun, but it's a fluid sort of market right now, and all the eyes are on Russia to see what happens there.
All right, well, we're all keeping a close eye on that, but Mark Borlace, thanks very much for joining us today on Flow to help, I guess, demystify what's going on in the fuel market. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for your interest.